Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week through news and headlines ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and your other co-host this week is Sam. Welcome back, Sam.
Thank you, Daniel. It's good to be back.
You're on twice as much as all the other hosts, and it's worked out really well, especially this week with the news that we do have. If this is your very first episode of the show, the way we format it is we go through this week's news, and then we head into the more personal side of the show, the Brokehead Block, which is what Sam and I have been up to since you last heard us. So let's jump right in and explore sector number 547. So this first one pertains to an item we've sold a shit ton of, which is Pokemon over, in your case, over several years. And actually for me too, when I used to work at the comic shop, sold a ton of Pokemon. But this Pokemon in particular, we did not sell a lot of because there just weren't as many printed. And that one is Kadabra, who will be making its reappearance in the Pokemon trading card game with the upcoming Pokemon Card 151 set, which is due for release in Japan this June. So were you aware of the controversy that surrounded this Pokemon?
So it's funny, I think I learned about this at the beginning of COVID, and I thought it was like a joke or something, essentially like the guy was memeing on Pokemon, but this is, he took this seriously. I mean, this was an actual lawsuit, which is wild to me. I guess on one hand, I can some degree understand where the guy's coming from, but it's also... It's so insane that this lawsuit went on for as long as it did. I mean, this was multiple years. Do you have the statistics on hand as to how long this went on? Because it was not a short time span.
I do. So a little background on this. Kadabra was previously the center of this long feud between Pokemon and magician/illusionist Uri Geller. So Geller claimed that Kadabra was based off of his likeness, something that was supported by the Abra line having Japanese names based off of famous Egyptians, himself included. The spoons being a big thing that was his gimmick, and they used it for Kadabra. So he sued the Pokemon company, as you were mentioning, and that's when Pokemon pulled Kadabra from the trading card game and the anime. He has not appeared in Pokemon. Kadabra has not been around for 21 years. That's older than some brokeheads listening to this right now.
Yeah, I remember I heard about this at work, and then when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, I guess there hasn't been a Kadabra card printed in a long time, because I got into Pokemon in 98 when it was really blowing up, and he was in the first few sets. And then I even went as far as to like search on the work computers all the printings of Kadabra, and it's really few. And I did think it was funny that the whole point of it was, you know, oh, the spoon bending is my thing, and I thought that was just kind of like a spoof on psychics in general, because I remember growing up, like, that was a constant joke about people showing their quote unquote psychic powers by bending spoons and stuff. So I mean, it's cool that it's coming back. I'm interested to see what they do with it now that they can have free reign over it. What are your thoughts on this? Because you're a Pokemon guy.
Sure, I really like Alakazam, and it's funny that we were just sharing Matrix GIFs privately because you mentioned the spoon bending thing, and now there's a scene in there of someone showing their Matrix abilities by bending the spoon, and I'm wondering if Uri sued Warner Brothers over that scene or that movie.
I was just thinking that same thing. I don't know, because, yeah, that was another one, right? I think a lot of people attributed the spoon bending to the Matrix and stuff, too, because that was such a massive pop culture icon, and I think it just kind of got brought under the umbrella of, like, funny ways to show psychic abilities in pop culture. But, you know, this guy is claiming that he was the originator of that trick, and any, you know, use of that is attributed directly to him. So, you know, he's more than welcome to have that opinion. I just think this lawsuit went on for infinite years, And now, he's finally given in and said, for lack of better words, that it was silly and he drug it on for too long.
If Uri ever did sue Warner Brothers over that Matrix scene, I think would it be a good defense to just say there is no spoon? Did you watch the scene?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. That's the exact defense you didn't watch the movie, man. There is no spoon.
So it did finally get settled. Geller told PokeBeach, quote, "Look, I want to thank the Pokemon fans who reached out to me over the last few years, including the ones from PokeBeach who kept contacting me nonstop. So basically, it was you and my granddaughters that got me to change my mind. I love you all. And I must admit, totally open and honest, I was a fool. It was a devastating mistake for me to sue Pokemon. Kadabra was basically a tribute to Uri Geller. But it's back now. Forgive me. I love you all." End quote. I'm assuming Uri's his performer name. I'm guessing that's not his real name, which is why he's referring to himself in the third person.
Yeah, I assume so. Most magicians, I think, usually have stage names. I'm guessing that's what he meant by it. I have to wonder if, I'm sure what he's saying is at least partially true. I do have to wonder if it was just the lawsuit was costing him more money than he was ever going to make out of it. That's why he dropped it. Or if it was actually just he was tired of dealing with it.
Or Pokemon was like, look, we're not going to pay you every time we use Kadabra, so we're just not going to use the Pokemon. And he tried to wait that out.
That's exactly, I think, what a huge factor of it was. Because, I mean, like I was saying, I just found out about this recently being within the last couple years, and then it kind of dawned on me. So I don't think the average person was that aware that Kadabra wasn't in the TCG. So I don't think it was anything that Pokemon really could have done without, obviously. So I think this was just kind of a wash for him. But if there's, and I'm sure there are, huge Kadabra Alakazam fans. I mean, they get to use their card again now, so it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
If this had worked, then that would have set forward, and I'm not saying that the Jim or the Bruce Lee estate or Jackie Chan could have or would have gone through this, but Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan are named after them, so they could have easily also said, hey, if they're based on us, and I bet you the same thing would have happened of, okay, we're just not going to use Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee. We've got over 1,000 Pokemon now. It's fine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if this had worked and they had actually paid him any considerable amount of money, it definitely would have set a certain precedent because, as you were saying, a lot of Pokemon are based off of people or abstract concepts. That's kind of the whole thing, is it's a mishmash of a couple different things. So I think this would have just opened the floodgates for everybody to start taking a shot at Pokemon to see how much money they could get out of it.
Well, every single Pokemon is someone's favorite out there. So if Kadabra is one of your favorites, congratulations. You will start getting Kadabra merch all over again. Kadabra TCG. As I mentioned earlier, I really like Alakazam, and that's been printed throughout the years, and they've gotten around the Abra line by doing Alakazam EX or GX. That way you don't need the pre-evolution lines, and now we're getting all of that right back. So good on everyone involved and good on the full settlement. Fox ended up announcing more seasons, and this was something that fans were waiting on, even though it's like, you're going to renew it, but it's also like, are you going to renew it though? Like, for real? And that's for Bob's Burgers, Family Guy, and The Simpsons. So the shows have officially been renewed for 2 seasons, which will take the 3 into 2025. And I think that was the question, especially with Disney now owning that network or that company.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched Family Guy or The Simpsons in years, but I've watched a lot of Bob's Burgers. And I think the question now is always, how long is it going to get renewed for? Gosh.
It's been a while since The Simpsons, same here, because I'm one of those guys that jumped out at, I think, season 11 or 12 when it started getting a little weird. A lot more celebrities were making appearances, a little bit more modern with its jokes, and which I don't mind in things like South Park. For some reason, it works in South Park. But for The Simpsons, I think it was just a rotation of writers that left, especially like the Conan O'Brien days, like that whole crew. So I did end up falling out of it, but from what I understand, it's still an incredibly popular show. The ratings are still very strong on it. And then Family Guy and Bob's Burgers, I don't know how expensive those are to produce, probably nowhere near what The Simpsons costs. So I'm guessing they were financially feasible to be like, all right, a couple more seasons of this, and let's see where the numbers are in 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be less than The Simpsons because both of those shows, you have multiple people voicing, or the same person voicing multiple characters. So you're probably, even if that one guy is really expensive, it's still got to be cheaper than paying the salary of multiple voice actors, especially with how long The Simpsons has been on. Those guys' salaries have to be considerable. And the Simpsons animation budget has only gone up through the years because, like you said, it obviously still has a really high viewer count. Even if the viewership has dropped over the years, it's still the people that do watch it. It's like a mainstay for them. I mean, I remember I used to watch it with my dad when I was a kid, and even then it had been on for 10-ish years probably. And I think it's the longest running American animated series, if I remember correctly. So it's got a huge legacy, and that show is got to be just making Fox money out the nose. So it would be kind of crazy if they didn't renew it. But it's like you said, I think the question anymore is if it gets renewed, how long is the renewal for? And I actually had forgotten that Disney owns Fox now. So that does actually put a question mark on some of the adult animation, I think, because it definitely, I don't think, lines up exactly with the Disney brand and as a whole. And I think people are always questioning now, like, how long do we get this thing before it gets Disney-fied, for lack of better terms?
Yeah, The Simpsons has been the longest running. It beat out the Flintstones a couple of years back. You had mentioned that you watched The Simpsons with your dad when you were a kid. Was it ever a problem on watching The Simpsons for you, as far as your parents letting you watch The Simpsons? Because I remember, and this was probably a little before my time, but George Bush Sr. famously said something against The Simpsons, in which they then wrote it into the show. And something like, we need to be less like The Simpsons and more like, I forgot which old family he mentioned, which TV family he had mentioned. And that was a thing. It was kind of a controversial cartoon because, yes, it was not for kids, but kids were watching it.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an issue with my dad. I don't think my mom was super crazy about it. Essentially, if my dad was home from work and he was the one watching me, I was going to have to watch at least some of the stuff he wanted to watch. So it was a lot of Simpsons, Star Trek, and King of the Hill.
Nice.
And I think his mindset was like, I wasn't going to get the jokes for the most part, so it probably wasn't going to do any harm. And as far as like the stuff with like Homer choking Bart and stuff, I think he knew that I was smart enough to realize like that was played up for laughs. Like I'm sure the comparison George Bush Sr. made was probably to like Leave It to Beaver or something. And my dad was always a big fan of, social commentary and parody. So I think worst comes to worst, I was going to develop a decent sense of parody and humor from it. So it was never a huge deal. I do remember there was a couple times where my dad was watching it while we were eating dinner, and my mom was getting pretty frustrated at him, just because it's like, really, you're gonna watch this with your kids while we're eating? And his kind of thing was, if I'm home, I'm watching what I want to watch. So I don't think it was ever a huge thing. And I think it's one of those things I can understand to a degree wanting to shelter kids from certain stuff, but at some point it's like, how harmful is this? And for how long do I shelter my kids for?
I just looked up the George Bush quote, and he compared them to the Waltons, less like the Simpsons and more like the Waltons. And everyone clapped, right?
I'm older and I don't even know who what show that is. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely for his voters. Like, even us were like, what? What are you talking with the Waltons? I would have preferred
Got to
the
appeal
Jeffersons
to your
even.
base.
Yeah. I had one scene, I think, when I was a kid that kind of, I guess, traumatized me. I was like, holy shit. It was when Bart was in love with that girl that was kind of a bully a little bit. Like, she kind of egged him on to do worse things than even he does. And then he had that imaginary scene where she's like, you won't be needing this anymore, reaches into his chest and pulls out his beating heart. and throws it against the wall and it slides down with all the blood and everything. That's the one scene that I was
Oh
watching and I
yeah.
was like, oh, like as a kid, I'm like, I shouldn't be watching this. But
I do remember the Sideshow Bob episodes freaking me out a little bit too.
really,
Just because he has like this obsession with Bart for a while, and I was just like, that's kind of weird.
yeah, that's true. And also some of the early Treehouse of Horror episodes, because that's where they really pushed it as far as what they could get away with, since it was all fantasy, like what if stories type of things, Elseworlds. And
It's funny now because I think those are the main episodes that draw a lot of kids
Mhm.
in because they like the weird, wacky horror elements that they throw in every year.
Yeah, and now they do more of like, here's the popular thing, like Stranger's Things or whatever, and then they'll do a parody of that. It doesn't anymore, from what I've seen, stick to just horror, which is probably fine. It's what people want to see.
I do remember there was my dad and I also used to watch the X-Files together, and I remember being like, "Oh, I get that reference," because a couple of the Treehouse of Horror episodes had like the alien stuff in them that were definitely like X-Files spoofs, and I remember being really excited as a kid, being like, "That's the first time I got a reference," and also like they're both things I probably shouldn't be watching.
My mom was just strictly didn't care about The Simpsons, but she was like, "Don't watch Beavis and Butthead." It was something that she had watched, and she knew that it was whatever, like not for me or not for kids. And that was one thing that she was like, "No, you can't watch Beavis and Butthead." And I was like, "All right."
Oh yeah, my parents were pretty non-MTV in general because they knew everything on there was like very adult humor. And I think it was more the sex jokes and stuff and just the pure like bad language that they were like, we're fine with some violence and some like off-color humor, but this is a bit much.
A lot of companies are very light on numbers. This includes Fox. I don't know if they gave numbers specifically on these latest shows that they just renewed, but streaming services are very hush hush about it. Like Netflix will say, this broke our record for most watched show in the last 24 hours. And like it was Wednesday, I think, most recently. But Nielsen, whether or not you trust them, and it's very sketchy. Nielsen Samba's terrible. I don't know why people reference that one, but if you do listen to Nielsen, according to their streaming data, Netflix was king in the categories for both original programming and overall programming. So Stranger Things was the number one show streamed in both originals and overall categories. Ozark's final season made it to number 2 most streamed program in originals and number 4 overall. Wednesday was number 3 in originals. And Disney Plus only had 3 slots from the overall list of 30. And also, crummy, Prime Video had 2 slots. Everything else was Netflix. The full list is available at Deadline. But all this, the reason why I like this story is because of the doom and gloom that was around, I think 4 years ago or 4 months ago when the whole Russia thing was happening. People were like, Netflix is done. That's it. It's over. Look at their streaming. Their sub numbers have completely dropped because of the Russian conflict. And then like the very next quarter, like numbers were back up as far as profits and subs. And people were still like, oh yeah, Netflix is dead. They're dying. And it's like, what are you talking about? Look at their data.
Yeah, Netflix, I think, is like Disney or Apple at this point. They can trend downwards, but they're pretty much unkillable businesses. I mean, well, Disney's trying to some degree, but like there's just a built-in viewership. I mean, one Netflix, it has variety, which for better or worse is what a lot better or worse. That's what a lot of people want because you have something of everything. There's definitely an argument to be made that because of that, almost none of it is like the highest quality, but you know, a lot of people just want to know, oh, you know, without having to do anything, I have access to every genre. Some of the stuff is legitimately really good, but I think it's a comfort food for people. Like one, Netflix has been around for so long. People don't want to change their subscriptions. You know what you're getting. For now, at least there's no ads. And, you know, there's just so much content on there. You can just on Netflix alone just sit there and mass consume, you know, multiple series and stuff without having to even think about it because it brings up all the suggestions and stuff. So it's Like I watched it. I can't lie. It's super convenient. I did watch Wednesday and I really enjoyed it. I watched Glass Onion on there. Like, I don't think Netflix is going anywhere anytime soon. Like, you can look at trends and stuff, and yeah, like for sure it's going to trend downward at certain points, but it's like they're still massively profitable. I don't think there's anything that could happen at this point where it's like, oh, Netflix is for sure going to sink, short of maybe increasing the subscription price by like more than $5 and just flooding it with ads. I think those are the only two things that could really damage it in the long run.
I think you hit it perfectly with the variety being key in their success. They've got things that are probably awful, that are definitely awful, that are on there, and then there's things that are award winning. They just got off. There's going to be at least one or two award nominated movies for their Oscars this year, as far as like Best Picture, probably some Best Actor noms. I'd have to look at the full list, but I'm pretty sure that Netflix has had something over the last couple of years. And that just helps them. Things like this, where top 30 lists of most streamed things, and you've gotten over 90% of the stuff up. You can point to the execs or whomever's in charge and be like, look, we're beating Disney and Amazon. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that is massive. And yeah, I think almost every year since they ruled that like straight to streaming movies are eligible for Oscars, I think almost every year Netflix has had something that's been an Oscar nom. So not only is it, legitimized by the last market, but like the Academy recognizes it. There's just infinite clout for it.
And I'm glad that they're recognizing that if it's streaming only, it can be nominated, because I remember even as early as I think a year or two ago, it needed to have had some kind of theatrical release, even if it was a limited run. This is why Army of the Dead was able to win an Oscar, because it had a limited theatrical run. And so you're saying that now it's like, all right, it doesn't need to be in theaters. It can just be straight to streaming, and things like Apple TV. I know that has at least one nomination this year. So you're saying that it no longer needs that theatrical run?
I believe that's correct. I think that happened because of, the advent of COVID and theaters being shut down. It's like, if you limit it to stuff that only people can watch, like that's almost nothing at that point. So I think I believe that's correct. You can, as long as it is, there might be like a time parameter on it, like it has to meet a certain amount of minutes to be considered like a feature length film, but I'm pretty sure as long as it has some type of release and is movie length, and it might have to have some kind of board approval, but yeah, I'm pretty sure anything that's on Netflix is able to be put up for an Oscar. So I remember back when what was that? The Irishman came out, and people were like fucking losing it because there was a debate about whether or not that was eligible for an Oscar nom, and people were like, "Okay, tell me another movie this year that's come out that even contends with that," and it was a big stink. So I think that kind of put the fire under a lot of people's asses about like we gotta take a second look about why we have these parameters for what's eligible for an Oscar nomination.
Well, that's great. And it's probably also even better for viewership, trying to relate to they have a big audience problem right now with their ratings over the last couple of years. So that's probably a way to relate to the general public of like, hey, look, this movie that you saw when you were off of work that one night, or when you tucked the kids into bed and you and the wife watched that one movie, that's up for a nomination. Oh, I like that movie. That kind of thing, where it gets more people on a wider audience as to what they might have possibly caught on their favorite streaming service.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, just having that like Oscar nominated tag draws a lot of people to watch a movie that they were maybe on the fence about before. Like just knowing that it's getting some type of recognition is a pull for a lot of people, which is only good for these either smaller films that are going straight to streaming, which a lot of them are now, or even, like huge directors like Scorsese and stuff are just putting stuff straight onto streaming now because, the theater industry is not what it used to be. So a lot of directors, I think, would prefer to just go straight to the platform.
And that's one thing I was just mentioning last week because certain movies were nominated for Oscars and Golden Globes. I'm like, all right, every year I try to check out as many of those movies out as possible. And I'm doing that this year for the Oscars because I want to make sure one, I didn't watch a shit ton of movies last year. And definitely a lot of these I didn't even know existed until I saw them on these award lists. And I'm like, all right, let me check that out. And so I'm going through, like I just finished Elvis and I'm going through Bullet Train next, which I had no intention of watching. I saw a scene at my parents' house. My siblings were watching it. And I'm like, yeah, this doesn't look like it's for me. Now that it's nominated, I'm like, well, let me just sit down and watch this. I do like Brad Pitt. I may not like the style of movie, but I'll check it out. And maybe his performance will be enough to get him nominated for the Oscars. I don't know, but that does work for me, like you were saying, where if I see something nominated, I'm probably going to give it a shot.
Yeah, I think that's why I originally checked out Knives Out, because I think it had kind of gone under the radar for me. And then everyone's like, oh, you got to see this. It's up for all these awards. And then I'm like, I think oddly enough, back in the day, I would have been drawn to movies that have like a superstar cast. But now I've gotten so jaded that I'm like, oh, this is just going to be a bunch of like, high profile actors giving decent performances, but there's not going to be anything that like sets it apart. It's just going to bank on star power. And then I watched it and I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And then same thing with Glass Onion, which is the spinoff of that. I watched that and I was like, oh man, there's so many big name stars in this. Like, I wonder how it's going to go. And then I was like, it's awesome. Just like the first one. So there's definitely that stigma of like, is this really worth my time? And then as soon as you see that nominated for really anything, Golden Globes, Oscar, you're like, your interest goes up a little bit.
One streaming service that did not have anything on the Nielsen charts for last year was HBO Max. Although that may change with The Last of Us, and apparently the viewerships were great on that one, at least for HBO. And we'll see what Warner Brothers Discovery does next month with the service when they merge the Discovery and the HBO together. But The Last of Us is here to stay. After only 2 episodes, HBO has been renewed for a second season of The Last of Us. It is speculated that season 2 will cover part 2 of the game, although that has still not been confirmed. We don't know how the final episode ends on Last of Us. I think there's going to be 8 or 9 total. We've only had 3 out at this point. And depending on how it ends, they could just explore, either split the first game into several seasons or explore what happened between parts 1 and parts 2 of the video game.
Yeah, I watched episode 1 and enjoyed it quite a bit. And then I think I'm about halfway through episode 2. And don't get me wrong, the show's good. Like, production value's insane. The acting's great. It does have like a little bit of a hard time keeping my interest just because I've played the games and I'm kind of sitting there being like, do I need to watch this? I mean, I could just replay the game, but if you haven't played the games and you're interested in the world and the storytelling and you're not a gaming person, like I know you're not super into it, Daniel, I think it's definitely more than worth your time if that's the case.
It's one of those examples again of one of the game writers or co-writers is working on this show, so that's why it's sticking so closely to the events of the game, and that's an example of that good or bad thing, right? Whenever a fan base, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I'm just bringing this up as like a good comparison because it's a good example of if it's too close to the game, then that could cause a problem where it loses interest to someone that's already gone through it like you have, or someone can get bored with it and say, well, it's too much like the game. Could they have tried at least something new? But then when they take liberties like they did with the excellent Microsoft's Halo show, then the fan base also gets upset because it's too different. So I'm going to remember The Last of Us as one of those examples the next time someone says, why is this so different or that kind of thing when it comes to an adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. And Millennial Mike and I were talking about that a little bit. Like, I'm not really sure what the answer is because, for a long time, and it still happens in a lot of cases, like video game adaptations were just across the board, just dog shit. And now we're actually getting some good ones. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's so much like the source material. Do I want to watch it? And then your other option is you start like with Halo, you start taking liberties, and then you're going to piss off that portion of the fan base. So I'm not really sure what the answer is. I mean, I'm still going to keep watching The Last of Us because it's really good. I just think they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because it's like, do you try and appease the hardcore fans and just make it as much like the source material as possible? Or do you try and take some liberties to try and draw in, new audiences and maybe surprise the hardcore fans and take a gamble? I'm not really sure what the answer is with that, but I do think we should kind of just count our blessings and be happy that it's not just a horrible adaptation, because that's what we got for 20 years of video game related media.
Absolutely right. And I think that their concern should probably be like when you were saying, should they try to appease the fans? That's always a nice bonus, right? Because then they get word of mouth and they tell their friends or family. But honestly, I think the Last of Us fan base, or even the Halo fan base, when it's all said and done, when you compare them to the general audience, to people in their 40s, 50s, late 30s, that's the chunk of the money. That's the chunk of the viewership. So you want to try to get them to watch these things. And that's why, for example, Disney has been so successful with the MCU, because they play it very safe. They hit as many bullet points as they can to get it as appealing to the general audience as possible. So with something like The Last of Us, if you focus on appealing to the hardcore gamers, it's like, okay, great, they're going to be happy, but have you captured the bulk of your viewership on your platform, the people who are paying a majority of them for your streaming service? And it is a good thing that The Last of Us is that success story. Same with Halo, because they both appeal to the general audience. And in Last of Us's case, it also seemed to have appealed to the gamers. Like for you, the worst thing that I'm so far that you can say about it is it's like, okay, well, should I watch this if I've already played the games? Like, am I wasting my time? As opposed to you saying, holy shit, this adaptation sucked. Like, they got this terrible actor to play Joel. They got Tom Hanks to play Joel, and he's terrible. It could have gone so many ways wrong. And from what I've seen so far, I like the show. And like you were saying, the production value is insane. Those clickers are incredible.
Oh yeah. I mean, as far as the actual production quality and just the quality of the show in general, there's not really anything I've seen that anyone can complain about. The show looks great. The sound design is incredible. The acting is, A1. There's nothing inherently even remotely close to bad about the show. I think it's just, this is, I think, just going to be a conversation going forward about how important is faithfulness to the source material versus, just interest. But, I think they honestly made the right move, because it's like you were saying, at the end of the day, the studio has to make money. And if they don't make money off of this, all they're going to learn is we should just stop adapting video game material. Like even when it's good, people don't care. So I think in this case, the more money they make off of it, the better.
We were talking about the Oscars earlier, and one of the most famous directors of all time, Steven Spielberg, actually celebrated in an interview with Deadline the nominations for Top Gun and Avatar. He said, quote, "I'm really encouraged by that. It came late for the film that should have been nominated a number of years ago, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. That movie would have definitely garnered a Best Picture nomination today. So having these two blockbusters solidly represented on the top 10 list is something we should all be celebrating," end quote. And I understand there's this argument against the franchises or blockbusters or major things, but I'm on the side of, if the fucking movie's good, I don't care if it's an original project like Avatar is, or something already based on an existing film like Top Gun in that case. And I think he's right. Top Gun The Dark Knight in 2023 would have gotten nominated for Best Picture. Those were the days where even superhero films, as far as cinema, they weren't really hitting that mark. There was the Nolan movies, and then we'd gotten a bunch of weird stuff around it. The Raimi films, I think, were solid, but I don't know if I can call them on that same threshold as something as like The Dark Knight. But that was in an era where it probably would have been scoffed at to nominate a Batman film for Best Picture.
No, I'm 100% with you. I think it shouldn't matter what umbrella the movie falls under. If it's good, it should be up for consideration. And yeah, I mean, back in the day, a superhero movie would get nominated, if it got nominated at all, for like sound design or visual effects, and that was it. There was no chance of it getting best picture, best actor, best supporting actor, any of those ones that, people really want to see. And not just superheroes, any kind of like genre film. I mean, horror movies, sci-fi, none of that stuff was considered like award bait. There was literally, a certain type of movie that came to people's mind when they talked about Oscar contender. And you and I both know what it is. It's like drama period pieces.
Yeah.
And something where, or like biopics, something where a super high profile actor gives a performance of a very eccentric person, and they delve into that, and that's it for 2.5 hours. So yeah, I don't care if it's a franchise or, an original work. As long as the movie is good, I think the more representation we have, the better, especially for stuff like Top Gun, where, action movies have been considered kind of just dumb popcorn flicks for a long time, and you almost never see them get nominated for anything other than sound design or visual effects. So I think it's awesome that this stuff is being talked about more. This is only, good for moviegoers and for the industry as a whole, I think.
I was just looking up the year that, let's pretend that The Dark Knight would have been nominated for Best Picture. Like, all right, well, what would it have gone up against? And I'm like, oh man, that was a tough year. So No Country for Old Men ended up winning that year. And I don't think that would have changed if The Dark Knight was in there. But also There Will Be Blood. that was my favorite movie that year.
That's what we call an unbreakable board right there. Yeah, that's crazy. I do believe, oh my God, why is his name Heath Ledger? He did get some posthumous nomination for Best Actor, correct?
I think he won Best Supporting that year.
So, I mean, it got some recognition, but like you said, any of the ones that really are based around the whole movie and not just the actor, and even that, I think that was like one of the first instances of a superhero movie getting any kind of high profile Oscar recognition. It was pretty much unheard of. And in 2023, that movie would definitely be nominated, if not win. So it's just kind of crazy how far the nomination categories have come, but also in my opinion, there's still a lot of stuff that gets snubbed just because people have a preconceived notion about what is considered Oscar worthy or just award worthy in general.
Well, a little fun fact, up until this Pattinson movie, every actor that had played the Joker on the big screen had been an Oscar nominee at the very least. We had Jared Leto, Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, and that's broken now with Barry Keoghan, I think is his name. But if he ends up winning, it's something in his lifetime, then I guess that sort of continues. But I just thought that was kind of interesting how it's always been a very strong actor behind that Joker role up until this point. We had mentioned the Raimi films and how those were, I loved the first Spider-Man film. I watched it so many times when it came out in theaters. And then I downloaded a bootleg version when I was in high school, or it might have been junior high, but it was in computer aided drafting class. And I downloaded all these bootleg programs that all me and my friends were using the computer lab computers for. And Spider-Man, no one was putting it up. And then finally someone put it up and I downloaded it and it's fucking Kangaroo Jack.
Oh no.
So I had to legit wait until the movie came out again and I was dying to watch it. Well, the head actor, Tobey Maguire, on Discussing Film recently said that he would return as Spider-Man if asked. He said, quote, "I love these films and I love all of the different series. If these guys called me and said, would you show up tonight to hang out and goof around? Or would you show up to do this movie or read a scene or do a Spider-Man thing? It wouldn't be a yes. It would be a yes, because why wouldn't I want to do that?" End quote. Very different tune from before this No Way It's Cinema came out, because from what I remember, he famously kept hating on ever coming back as Spider-Man, because it was like, he's like, all right, I did that. I put in my time. I'm done with the character. But it sounds like he got paid very well for that last film. And now he's like, I'll take some more of that money.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder how much of this is just he super enjoyed it and he's come around, and how much of it is money talks.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's quite a bit of that. How would you feel if he did come back and do another project outside of the MCU as Spider-Man? Would that interest you?
If it was produced by Sony, I would watch it 100%.
I definitely I feel the same way. It's funny that you mentioned trying to bootleg the first movie. I was obsessed with those films as a kid. I remember I would go to Publix with my mom, and they have that huge magazine section, and anything Spider-Man movie related on the front of the magazine, I would bug my mom to buy it for me. I remember a few years ago, I was on, an adult website, and someone had uploaded the entire Spider-Man trilogy as like a 6-hour porn video somewhere.
Nice.
But just, the actual movies
Right.
just ripped them straight on. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think I would definitely watch him do it again. The question is, so in No Way Home, he plays an older version of the same character from the Raimi verse. Would you want that? Like, would you want something that takes place in the same continuity, or do you think it would be cool to see him do like almost an Elseworld thing?
I wouldn't care if it was in continuity because Morbius is technically connected to the MCU, but it's fully Sony produced. So as long as Sony's making it and they can say it's a part of the MCU, and I wouldn't care. I'm just concerned as to who's producing it because I know that there's definitely a quality that comes with a Marvel Sony production as opposed to a Marvel Disney production.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm not sure how that contract works either as far as Spider-Man goes, because I think when that deal was originally drafted, it was like Sony still owns this.
Yeah.
They can use him in the Marvel universe with Sony approval.
Hmm.
But I know that contract has been, the original one I think expired, and now it's very touch and go as to who has rights, who's allowed to do what, all of that stuff. So it would be interesting, but like you said, I think there would be a big question mark of how much of this is Marvel Sony and how much of this is Marvel Disney, because it's two very different entities as far as the quality and production of them go.
Absolutely. And from what I've seen, it hasn't changed a whole lot from that, where it's a lot like the Universal Hulk deal where Disney can pay Universal to use the Hulk on the big screen, and there are certain parameters obviously that Universal says, okay, you can have the Hulk do this and you can have the Hulk not do that. And I know Sony's a lot more strict with Spider-Man, famously in those leaks from I think a decade ago, the Sony email leaks of like he has to be straight, he has to have a girl, whatever it was, like all of those things that were out. They definitely have these parameters that Disney needs to play within. And I believe they paid to use the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield portions or versions of Spider-Man in No Way at Cinema, and then it goes back to Sony again, and they have to go through another process if they want to use those characters in the future. So I believe it still stays the same. And now you did see that movie, I'm guessing, No Way Home, right?
Yeah, I did.
Is that performance of his Peter Parker, from what I understand, they didn't even have him interact with Norman Osborn, which is bizarre. Like you brought these amazing actors back and you won't even have them share a scene of dialogue together, which is insane. But was his performance as Spider-Man still about the same as what we got in that first trilogy?
Like, they don't try and hide the fact that he's aged. If anything, I almost feel like they aged him up a little bit with makeup. There's definitely plenty of callbacks. It's funny now that you mention that. I guess that's true. He does have a scene with Norman Osborn towards the climax of the movie, because spoiler alert, I guess if you haven't watched that movie, Norman is definitely like the biggest villain of the movie. He's kind of the one that sets the entire conflict into motion. So they have a callback to Spider-Man 1 at the end where oh god, what's the new Spider-Man's name? Tom Holland and him are fighting, and Tom Holland goes to stab Green Goblin with his own glider, and Tobey Maguire stops him from doing it.
Oh my
that's
God.
that's the scene itself. But there are some cool interactions with him and Alfred Molina, who played and does play in this, Doc Ock. So they definitely had him act a lot as the same character. But for some people, I think that could be a hang up because it's like, 15 years have passed and he's still saying the same lines and blah, blah, blah. But there's definitely some subtle hints about the end of Spider-Man 3 and how his character has changed and stuff. So I would be interested to see more of it because I think it would be cool if they went almost a Peter B. Parker route, like in Into the Spider-Verse, where we kind of see the ramifications of him making some of the not great choices that he made in Spider-Man, especially in Spider-Man 3, where he, gets the black suit and just does some very questionable things. I think it would be cool if we saw how his life panned out after that.
Kind of reminds me of the comic series where he and Mary Jane are married and she's helping out as I forgot what her official name in that. It might even just be Spider-Woman, but their kid has the powers, and as a family, they help protect the city. So it'd be interesting to see if he and MJ ended up getting back together after 3. Like, we know they dance, but there's no real closure there. And if they end up having another Spider character kid or something with powers, like, that would be really interesting to see. So if anything, like I said, if it's Sony, I'm in.
Penny Parker, I think, was that character's name. That is a very underrated series.
There you go. Well, there's someone who is also not very happy with the MCU. I've always liked Stephen Dorff. And in an interview with Variety, in case you don't know, Stephen was in Blade, True Detective, also from HBO, had some choice words for the MCU Blade reboot and the recent Bland Adam film from Warner Brothers Discovery. He said, quote, "All this other garbage is just embarrassing. You know what I mean? I mean, God bless them. They're making a bunch of money, but their movies suck, and nobody's going to remember them. Nobody's remembering Black Adam at the end of the day. I didn't even see that movie. It looks so bad. Marvel is used to me trashing them anyway. How's that PG Blade movie going for you? That can't get a director? Because anybody who goes there is going to be laughed at by everyone because we already did it and made it the best." End quote. So I've got to say, I know a lot of people have been saying, like, who is this guy? Is he just trying to stay relevant? Whatever. But from everything he's saying, I agree. This is actually something Zach said a couple of years back about the Ant-Man film. He's like, no one's going to remember Ant-Man. It's flavor of the week. And I believe that was Zach. And it was like, he's right. Like, no one talks about the first Ant-Man or Guardians of the Galaxy 2 even. Like, no one's talking about these films, but people still bring up stuff like Man of Steel or we were just talking about the Raimi films. Like, they still bring these up. The Dark Knight is still in headlines with Steven Spielberg. And I get that it's another quote of someone trashing the MCU and Black Adam, but I'm like, it's another sign that DC and Marvel are on the same boat now. It's kind of like the 90s again, man, where, except for Blade, where the movies are kind of suck again.
I was just going to say, I mean, this guy's statement has credibility just based on the fact that I rewatched Blade 1 and 2 recently, and it's like, yeah, they're 20 years old now. The CG doesn't hold up as well as you would hope it was, but that opening scene in the nightclub,
yes,
that scene's still fucking awesome. Like, Blade, I think it's pretty safe to say those movies, being as good as they were, are part of the reason we can have legitimized comic book movies at all. So that, if nothing else, gives his statement a lot of water. So, and he's completely right. Like, if you like the Marvel movies, then good on you. I'm glad that, you're enjoying it. But it's like, even my friends that are still watching all of them, they're super excited when the movie's about to come out. The movie comes out, they watch it, they tell me about it. And then a week later, it's off their radar. Like, there's no like sense of permanence with this, because it's like you and I were talking about earlier in the episode. It's just mass consumption. Like, they're putting out as much as possible to make sure they make as much money as possible, and it appeals to as many people as they can.
Yep.
And some of these movies are legitimately not even good. Like, part of the reason Guardians 2 isn't even on a lot of MCU fans' top list is the movie just is bland. And a lot of them, it's like, oh yeah, it's really fun is the thing that you'll hear a lot of people say. Like, it's fun, which means, it's a popcorn flick. and you go in and you shove a bunch of food in your face and you watch it with your friends, and that's totally fine. But a lot of them are just actually, if you look at the production quality and the care put into them, not particularly good movies.
That triggered an old memory when I used to work at the comic shop in Orlando, where these MCU movies were coming out, and I think BVS was just coming out or had just released, and I'm like, look, I'm not. The boss would buy tickets for every latest MCU film, and he'd be like, "Oh, come on, I'm buying, I'm watching," and I forgot what the last one I saw was, but I was finally like, no, I'm not going to come out to these anymore, man. They're not good. Save your money, dude. It's fine. And he's like, oh, come on, you just don't like having fun. You just hate fun. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And that you're right. That's exactly what everyone says. It's like, they're just fun movies, man. It's like, all right, well, what does that even mean?
It's like, yeah, but at some point I can spend my time doing something that I actually get long running enjoyment out of, as opposed to, yeah, I guess I'll watch this thing they're long now too. They're like 2.5 hours plus. So it's legitimately a time sink. Like, okay, yeah, they're fun. How many of those do I need in 1 year?
Mm. Well, huge thanks to Steven, if anything, if you are an MCU fan, without Blade, Marvel couldn't have continued and funded the Raimi Spider-Man films, and the rest is history after that. So a lot is owed to Blade, that's for sure. We've got some comic news this week as DC continues forward with their new line of new number ones as part of the Dawn of DC line. So they did reveal the first half of new titles. So these include Unstoppable Doom Patrol by Dennis Culver and Chris Burnham in March, Superboy Man of Tomorrow by Kenny Porter and Janoy Lindsay, which was a part of the round robin votes for winning titles featuring Connor Kent in April, Green Arrow by Joshua Williamson and Sean Isaacs, Titans by Tom Taylor and Nicholas Scott in May, Green Lantern featuring Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart by Philip Kennedy Johnson and Osvaldo Montes in May, Batman the Brave and the Bold by Tom King, Mitch Gerrits, Guillaume Mark, Gabriel Hardman, Dan Mora, and Rob Williams in May, Cyborg by Morgan Hampton and Tom Renee in May, Shazam by Mark Waid, I don't like that guy, and Dan Mora in June, The Penguin by Tom King and Stefano Guardiano in June, and finally Steelworks by a to-be-announced creative team also in June. Do any of these catch your attention, Sam?
Yeah, definitely. Titans is for sure going to be a pickup for me because they set that up in Nightwing 100, which we'll talk about later. And I just think Tom Taylor's just a really good character writer.
Yeah.
Who did you say the artist was on that one?
Nicholas Scott.
Or has it not been? Okay, yeah. So that's, I think, going to be really good. What was you said one of them was illustrated by Guillaume March, right? Which one was that?
So that's the compilation book called Batman the Brave and the Bold. It's basically going to be it's like an annual, but every month, a bunch of side stories and compilations by different artists and writers.
That could be really cool. I am usually a fan of those Batman team up books until they start getting way too bombastic. Yeah. But Guillaume March is an incredible artist, so I might check that one out just out of curiosity. And then I also want to check out the Green Arrow book. Supposedly, that one is going to have a lot to do with Roy. And in the current DCU, Roy has been largely absent. So that's, I think, as long as the writing's solid, going to be really interesting. What about you?
If I see, I'm looking at this from I don't know why, from a comic manager standpoint, because I'm like, okay, that will sell, that won't sell, that'll be canceled. I know
it's in your blood.
Yeah, it's a part of me now. Titans is going to do well, and I think that's probably going to be good. And I would maybe I should read it. I like Tom Taylor a lot, but the characters I'm not as crazy about. So I'm kind of back and forth on that one. But a good writer will make me care about characters that I didn't care about before. So I think I will give Titans a shot. And the Green Lantern series, I'm dying for a good Green Lantern book again, and it's been a while. Maybe I'll give this a shot. I don't know. I'm back.
Who's writing that one?
That one is Philip Kennedy Johnson.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with him. How do you feel about that lineup, Hal and John?
I mean, they're the two most popular Lanterns, so you're covering your bases there. It could work. But it's one of those things that Green Lantern in general, except for when Jeff Johns was doing it, hasn't been an incredibly strong selling title. I do think that okay, so let me ask you something. Which of these do you think will not make it to the end of 2023?
Oh, out of all of them,
Yeah, which titles do you think it's like, yeah, the sales are going to be it's going to get canceled?
probably that last one. Oh, I don't know, man. I want Doom Patrol to succeed. I was gonna say I probably might check that out too, out of curiosity. I just think that title has a tough time, man. I think
Mhm.
it's not superhero-y enough for superhero fans, and it's not like strange talesy enough for like the mystery and like supernatural fans either. I think that title, it's got some really cool ideas, and it always has. But I mean, historically, that thing has never stuck around long. Also,
Right.
that last one that you said, what was it, Steelworks?
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe
that
that's
one's
going to
gone.
involve like Steel and a couple of
Oh,
the
that one's
DNC
gone for
characters,
sure.
yeah.
There's no way that makes it. That's another one. Like Steel is a lot of people like him, quote unquote. But then when the titles come out with him as the lead character, they don't do well because it's, at the end of the day, it's Superman in an Iron Man suit. Like his whole role in Reign of Superman was to fill in while Superman wasn't there. So in a world where Superman's around, there's not a huge spot for him.
Well, you saved the
So
title by having it based on Shaquille O'Neal's Steel. I bet you it'll sell better then.
that's true. Yeah, you actually you do what they did with The Rock and get Shaquille O'Neal on the covers in the costume, and
Fuck
then it
yeah.
flies off the shelf.
Yeah, here's the ones that I think Doom Patrol's not going to make it. I agree. Steelworks, same thing. Normally, I'd say the Penguin. Like, why would you ever solicit a Penguin series? But it's Tom King. People are going to buy it for Tom King. I think
Yeah,
Shazam is not going to make it. Mark Waid will eventually drop out of that book. There, it'll end after probably 12 issues. Cyborg, same thing. Cyborg's never sold well, unfortunately. It
yeah.
does.
Historically, Cyborg can't carry a solo title, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think Green Lantern has to be amazing for it to pull any new readers into it. Otherwise, it's going to go 12 issues. Titans is going to go, it's going to stay because of Tom Taylor, amazing writer and enough fans. I think Titans does okay in general, but with Tom Taylor on, I think it has the potential to be one of their top sellers. Green Arrow, it's been a while since Green Arrow's had a title, and I know people have been asking for it. Joshua Williamson is awesome, so I think that's going to stay. And
Yeah, that's a super solid pick, I think.
Superboy would normally be a cancel, but like this is going to sound cruel, but they can't cancel the book because then they'll get canceled. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
their only book I think that has a lead gay character, they can't cancel it. So I think it's
right.
it's there to stay. And I do hope it does well because it was voted as round robin. So people are saying we want this book. It's like, okay, well, let's see how much you really want it. Go to your comic shop and buy it.
Dude, that's always my stance on it is, people love to clamor when these books get canceled and stuff, and it's like, well, go fucking buy it, man.
Right.
Like, the comics industry as a whole is constantly in a state of turmoil. They cannot keep books that aren't performing. It costs them too much money. But yeah, I hope it does well too, because I'm not the biggest super family fan, but Connor had a crossover with Nightwing in his book, so I picked up the issues that Nightwing was featured in, and the book was really well written, and the characters really likable. Like, so I hope the title does well. Like you said, it might not get canceled just on the fact that it has some LGBTQ representation, but I hope it legitimately actually makes really good numbers because there's a lot they could do with the character that I think is really interesting.
When the next half of the new number ones get announced here, which I think is going to be 10 more titles, we will definitely cover it here on the show. Last week, we were talking about Titans and Doom Patrol. It got revealed that both shows will be ending after their current fourth seasons on HBO Max. So Doom Patrol and Titans fans are now on team Fire James Gunn, boycott Warner Brothers Discovery. And once again, I've been on here for, it seems like years, and I'm like, welcome to the team. Where have you been? Fans have speculated that this would be the case amid the restructuring at changes with DC Studios. James Gunn and Peter Safran recently, of course, stepped in and they announced that they want their shows and their movies and their video games to all be connected in the alleged pedoverse. It's all going to be a part of one thing. So they want those characters, they want their versions of those characters. So that's why people speculated those are going to be gone. Sure enough, after those got canceled and Titans fans and Doom Patrol fans went after James Gunn on Twitter, he responded with a tweet saying, quote, "The decision to end the series precedes us, but I certainly wish the best for the talented group of creators, actors, and the rest of the crew that produced both shows." Whether or not that's true, I think they were going to, if Zaslav hadn't canceled it, I think Gunn would have.
Oh, 100%. Have you watched either of these series?
I watched season 1 of Titans and then season 1 of Doom Patrol as well. And I like Doom Patrol more than Titans, but it wasn't enough for me to come back.
I'm actually in the exact same boat as you. I wanted to like Titans a lot, and a lot of my friends enjoy it. I just couldn't get past the visuals. I thought it just looked very awkward at times. I did like Doom Patrol quite a bit, but as you were saying, like, there's so much shit to watch. It wasn't quite good enough for me to be like, oh yeah, let me jump back in for season 2. It literally, like I was just saying, like, Doom Patrol just has a tough time. But yeah, it's kind of like, welcome to the team, everybody. This is going to keep happening, by the way. He's just going to keep dropping stuff in hopes to make everything in the DC universe into the DC MC universe. So I'm not shocked. I feel bad for the fan bases for these show. I feel really bad for the actors and producers and writers of this show. But yeah, this is going to be the world that Warner Brothers DCU lives in now.
I'm honestly surprised Doom Patrol made it to 4 seasons, so if I were a fan, I would have just been grateful for that alone. A Doom Patrol show made it 4 seasons. Like, what a weird sentence. In 20,
Dude,
like,
that's
ever.
honestly, like, commendable for any original streaming service show at this point. So they really deserve a lot of props. You know, I'm a fan of Young Justice, and that's not getting renewed either, so I feel for them. It's frustrating, but it's, you know, this is why you have to, you got to vote with your dollar.
It's as I was saying on Twitter too, if I like playing this game, Sam, of if this was a David Zaslav decision, truly great decision. Those shows were not great, probably very expensive, and they're trying to cut down on debt. If this were a James Gunn decision, terrible decision. You guys should definitely go after James Gunn and boycott all his movies and shows. This is the game that
absolutely.
I play now. And it is a lot of fun.
No, and I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, I can't argue with the fact that it's a business. If the show's not profitable, it's not going to be able to stick. But also, I don't want certain people getting any creative control. So, boo on that.
Well, get ready, man. James Gunn Nightwing's coming.
I'm not going to watch
coming.
it. I love the character. I won't watch it, man. I have to have a line in the sand, and it comes down to pedophilia. That's all it is for me.
Well, the good news is, I don't know if you saw the news that he is not at all involved in the comics. He's already been clear about that they're going to let the comics do comics. So we'll always have that, if anything.
Thank God.
I would not want the big screen versions of these characters now to be the characters in the comics.
No, and it's like, you know what he's going to turn them all into, too. They're all going to be MCU Peter Quills, every character.
Absolutely.
Because that's the only way he knows how to write it.
Insane. And supposedly over the next couple of days, we're recording this a little earlier in the week, but we're supposed to be getting the James Gunn announcement of what his first couple of movies are, a little bit of his slate, and everyone's waiting. Good against antis and for are waiting for that slate. So we will absolutely cover that, if anything, for fun on next week's show. That does round out the news for this week. We do have a Patreon comment this week from Adrian. Huge thanks. And he's referring to last week's episode. He said, quote, "Wow, Alfred's dead? I didn't know that. Did the internet freak out? I guess not. If Zack Snyder or Ben Affleck killed off Alfred in his Batman film, there would have been an uproar. With Nightwing, I was never really attached to his character. He was cool to watch in BTAS and the Joel Schumacher Batman films. I always saw their Bruce and Dick relationship as just mentor-mentee. That's it. I'm with Daniel that my favorite Robin is Damian Wayne, even though he's a cocky little brat sometimes. I see Damian becoming the next Batman, like John Kent the next Superman. Keep it in the blood. I guess the comics didn't want to do that. What a waste, especially after they had that Super Sons comic run. If Zack Snyder's Justice League ever gets the live-action sequels greenlit, I hope the final epilogue shows a hint at the next generation's world's finest," end quote. So a little bit to unpack there. First, I did want to ask you, with Nightwing on the previous iterations of them, and as far as their relationship as Bruce and Dick, I already gave my thoughts last week, so I promised the Brokettes that I would get your thoughts this week of what were your feelings on, and I know it's dealing a little bit into Nightwing number 100, but the quote that Dick finally calls Batman, he says, "I love you, Dad."
Yeah, I really liked that whole page. If you've been reading the comics, they've kind of been building up to that. Since Alfred's death, especially in the Nightwing book, Bruce has made a very concerted effort to be a little more open and vulnerable with his kids, all of them. But it's especially shown through with Dick because he is written as being such an emotionally available character. So I thought that scene was really sweet and kind of a long time coming, but really potent. There had been some hints before because in conjunction with all of that, Dick had also been shot in the head by KG Beast a few years ago. A few years ago, real time. I think it's probably a few months ago in comic book time, but that had also kind of shaken Bruce a lot because he realized like his kids are not invulnerable and he could just lose them. So after Dick gets his memories back of who he actually is and not being called Rick Grayson, Bruce had made a pretty hard effort for him, especially to connect with him a little bit more. So I thought that was a really cool, strong moment. I thought all of Nightwing 100 was really good. The big reveal at the end I thought was also really cool.
And Adrian, if you want to see, for example, Damian Wayne take over as Batman, I would suggest reading Deceased if you're able to find that in trade paperback format, because that's exactly what happens. Or it's either Batman 666 or Detective 666, which is a future jump into Damian becoming Gotham City's Batman in the future, in which he admits, like, I'm not as good as Dick Grayson was, or, you know, my skills aren't the same as the other Robins, but I can do this. And he basically makes Gotham into a giant booby trap, and he kills criminals in that way. He makes Gotham his own, really truly his own, way more fearful than when Batman was Batman, and obviously very fitting that it was in 666, as he is the son of the demon.
Yeah, I actually love that story. I think Morrison wrote it, and I'm not a Morrison fan, but that I think was one of the coolest things about that run on Batman was the Damian Wayne future stuff. I thought all of that was actually really well done and super interesting. They delve into it a couple more times also. There's a collected edition called Time in the Batman, if he wants to check that out, where they also revisit that.
And a few months ago, we had Dan DiDio on the show, and part of his future state line, or 5G, I should say, was that they would jump into the future, and Damian would be he would actually be the new head of the League of Assassins, the new head of the Demon, the new Ra's al Ghul, but that he would serve as the future Batman symbol in that way, where Superboy and Damian are at odds with each other. They disagree on things, very much like Superman and Batman do, except Batman and Superman would be teaming up to later fight the younger generation of heroes, including the new Ra's al Ghul, which is Damian, and the new Superman, which would be Superboy at that point. So the old generation versus the new, and that would have been the culmination, the ending of this 5G 5-year plan. So what could have been, if you want to do some extra digging and some reading, Adrian. But there you have it. Let's head on over into the Broket block, which is what Sam and I have been up to since you last heard us, what we've been playing, reading, watching, what's been making us broke. So Sam, kick it off. What have you been up to in the last month or so?
So I was behind on Nightwing, so I got caught up, read issues 99 and 100 back to back. Super good for anyone that's interested. Definitely check it out. Tom Taylor's a really great writer. The artwork is also phenomenal. Really good at portraying Dick's athleticism and the kind of like frantic kinetic energy that goes on in the fight sequences. Other than that, I have been playing Persona 4 Golden, and I also finally got Transistor, Daniel, and just started that.
Oh my God, that's so good.
It's awesome. I love it. Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a couple Steam gift cards for Christmas and saw that a couple things were on the $20 sale. So I picked that up and immediately just got addicted to it. I'm loving it. It's so good. Other than that, like I mentioned briefly, I watched all of Wednesday on Netflix. I enjoyed that a lot, and then also checked out Glass Onion and an Ethan Hawke movie called The Black Phone that came out last year. I'll be talking about that with the Brosker stuff, but it's
Ooh,
a suspense horror movie where Ethan Hawke plays a child kidnapper in the I think it takes place in the late 70s. It's super good. There's also like a mystery aspect of one of the kids trying to solve essentially how to get out because he has him trapped in a basement. So there's almost like a supernatural detective aspect of it. It's really cool.
what's it on?
That Amazon Prime.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So definitely worth a watch if you're either an Ethan Hawke fan or a horror movie fan. What have you been up to?
Well, I did do a little trip, but before that, I want to ask you, how many Nightwing variants did you get for 100?
I only got 3.
And that's pretty good. I mean,
Uh,
that book was what, 9.99, I'm guessing?
yeah, it was yeah. So I got the one with all of his different suits. I got the Titans one where they're all, in a circle together
That's a good
and
one.
Dick's taking a selfie with all of them, and then I got the standard cover.
Was there a Barbara and Dick one that they came out with?
Yeah, my comic shop was out of that one,
Okay.
unfortunately. I think that one is like a really skewed ratio. Like, I think
Oh,
that one's
yeah.
pretty hard to get. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always tough because especially for a 9.99 book, I know for me when I ordered for the comic shop, it'd be like, all right, maybe if this was Batman 100, I'll reach for that incentive, but something like Nightwing, it's more like, well, whatever we qualify for based on our initial order is great. It's like it's not
Yeah,
worth taking a big
exactly.
risk on it.
When I asked my LCS about it, because there was another one too, I actually didn't like the cover because it was a foil cover, but there was a 1 in 100 variant, and I was like, "What are the chances you can get this for me?" And they're like, "We're not going to meet the number to get that. I'll keep it in mind if we do get it, and I'll throw it in your sub box, but there's almost no chance we get it for a book like this." So I was like, "Yeah, that makes sense."
eBay it is. That's always the go-to.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Nightwing number 100 foil variant. I'm going to look that up right now. I'm going to guess $100. It is 120 currently for bidding.
Jesus
So
Christ. Yeah.
sold. So I mean, that's just based on what people are actually paying for it. Let's see what the actual sold prices are. And the sold prices are. It's not. Oh, is that the one with the where he? It's kind of like a character design. There's a George Perez foil variant. Is that the one you were referring to?
Holy smokes.
There's a 1 in 50, there's a 1 in 100. The George Perez one is $250 sold for right now. The
Holy smokes. Yeah, I only saw I didn't see the George Perez one.
that one's awesome, and I got to correct myself. That's a 1 in 150 variant, so that makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
one he's passed away, but two, it's a higher incentive variant. So yeah, those are going to be hefty foils right there.
I mean, he also, to lavish on more about George Perez because he's awesome. He also co-created the character, so like there's just so much collector value in that.
Mhm. Yeah, and we've said it before, and I don't get tired of saying it. He was an incredibly kind creator. My sister's favorite character is Deathstroke, and she's met him a couple times because she owns his first appearance and a bunch of other Deathstroke merch that she still collects. And so I've met him through her by seeing her. And I've gotten the DC versus Marvel book signed by him, and he was always so nice. He was incredibly nice, and you don't get that out of a lot of comic creators.
Right. Yeah, no, he is one of the nicest quote unquote celebrities, if not the nicest that I've ever met. Just an incredible human being. I mean, I met the guy at a charity event for kids with cancer. So that right there tells you
Mhm.
a lot about him as a human.
And he always did the hero initiative thing at his tables. He'd be like, just donate here and I'll sign something. And it's like, oh, that's
Yes,
amazing.
exactly.
So I ended up going with Palpa Kelly, my wife, to St. Augustine. And that's one, we've been to St. Augustine before, but we made the trip this year of like, okay, well, let's get away. Obviously, I can't take a ton of time off work because I just started this new job, so I don't have a lot of time built in. So we ended up aiming for the weekend. And we ended up staying overnight at St. Augustine and checking out the different restaurants and food options. And we went to the port, which was a Spanish castle. And that's the thing that I that I kept putting on Discord of tagging you and Millennial Mike because of the Last Samurai film with Tom Cruise. I came across like a thing of like the Spaniards were big on on Catholicism, right? So it's like, hey, become a Catholic and then you can join the army and be one of us. But if you don't, then you're in jail, you're a slave, you're a worker, whatever they had, they did it all. So there was that Englishman who was like, no, I'm not. And then eventually he had some useful skills to the Spaniards and he worked his way in the camp to becoming very useful for him. And they were finally like, look, you become a Catholic and you'll be one of us. And he finally did it. So I was like, there it is, the last Spanish samurai.
The last Spamurai.
And I kept going through the fort and I'm looking at all the historical things. And the same thing was the case for a black soldier who did the same thing, I'm like, look, it's the last black samurai now, the same story. And then kept going. And then they had one for a Native American. I'm like, one for every streaming service. Let's make it happen.
St. Augustine's awesome. It's one of my favorite places. I've been to that fort a number of times.
Castillo de San Marcos, I believe is what it was called. Very cool fort. I think it was only $15 to get in, and it was worth it. I don't know if we'll do it again. Maybe when Leo gets a little older, we can show him some of that stuff. Like, look, Leo, some of our early people, and see some of that. But it was cool, and we enjoyed it. More importantly, though, I know I've been getting some feedback on Instagram over the Buc-ee's stories that I've been putting up. You and I work with someone who used to work with someone who was very big on Buc-ee's. So shout out to Mike. And he had the Buc-ee's hat.
Buc-ee's.
He does. And there were customers that would come in with the fucking Buc-ee's shirts. And I'd be like, what's the big fucking deal with that place? Everyone comes in with that stupid thing on there, the little animal on there. What is it? And he's like, well, it's a really big gas station. And I'm like, okay. And what else? Well, and he was telling me about the stuff they had, like the fudge and these food options. And then he went on and on about the stalls, how it has like 100 stalls in there, which is crazy. And it's always clean. Kelly told me the same thing. She had been once and she was like, it's the cleanest bathroom I've ever been to. And it does have a ton of stalls in it. And there's always someone in there cleaning right after you. After you're done using that toilet, someone comes in and cleans up. And I'm like, what is this, like the high-end gas station? What's going on with this thing?
It's like a high-end strip club where the guy gives you mints and squeezes the soap out for you.
I was thinking of that where, like, I was remembering the nightclub in House of Blues Orlando, downtown Disney. They used to have two guys in there that would give you the towels. They'd have cologne in there for you, whatever. And that's what I was thinking this was kind of sort of going to be. So we went in and I was like, all right, let's stop in. And it's fucking packed like crazy. And I'm going on a Saturday, Sunday, so everyone's out, but I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, it's just a goddamn gas station, everyone. Holy shit. Line to get in, line to get out. And I was put on Instagram like, why do you need this many fucking ice bins outside? What is going on? Go in and there's just people fucking everywhere. Almost all of them white, by the way. Like,
this is of course, dude. Their mascot's a beaver.
Is that what that is? Not a gopher?
It might be a gopher. You might be right.
I don't know. It's a beaver. I'm just being a schmuck. But okay. I'm looking around.
It's a white person animal.
And that's one thing that, like, Jordan, one of my buddies, I used to work with him at the comic shop. He was like, I was the only black guy in there, and it was like a record scratch where all the old white people turned around and looked at me. And I'm like, dude, I was the same way. I was like the darkest guy in there. So I'm going in, and sure enough, I noticed that. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, all right, this is just a bigger, shittier Wawa. That's all this is. And
that's what I was going to ask you. Is it not just a Wawa on crack?
That's all it is, but it's a worse version where it's, I don't know. To me, the food looked worse than Wawa. I did get one taco, and it was very bland. Wasn't impressed by it. I had their banana pudding thing, a little cup of it, same thing. I was like, this is not anything special. But what I did notice,
I was gonna say, I think especially for you or me, all of my friends that love that place, it's because they go in and get like brisket and shit. Like, right. I feel like if I go in there, I'm going to be so unimpressed because it's going to be like, do you have sauteed veggies? Is there a veggie burger? There's nothing here for me. Oh, good. Overpriced fudge. Let's get it.
But yeah. And that's the thing. Like, even if they did, all right, well, it's not going to be that great anyway. Now, I'm criticizing the hell out of Buc-ee's, but I will say I was paying attention to, I'm like, why is this so successful? And they have have you been to a Buc-ee's yet? No,
I have
you had
never
asked
been.
about if it's a Wawa on crack. They have a section on with home goods. So they've got like babies' clothes, they've got plates, decorations for your home. They're not all Buc-ee's themed. Some of them are like regular companies that go in there and set up their display. So I'm like,
Right.
okay, so they have stuff for women, they have stuff for men, they have stuff for kids. There's a Buc-ee's guy that comes out in the fucking costume and takes pictures with the kids. There's toys in there, and I'm like, so it appeals. It appeals to as many people as possible. The theme keeps going, and all
Yep.
their food is just safe enough. It's not too spicy. It's not too flavorful. It's bland enough to where as many people as possible can enjoy it. And that's
Well,
I'm like, okay,
it's
I
like
get
all
it.
barbecue centered, right?
Yeah, that was like what Mike was telling me. He's like, you should have gotten the brisket. I'm like, well, I don't eat brisket. I don't like brisket. And he was like, oh, that's right. But they were selling the shit out of those things. It's just fucking little barbecue pork on two plain ass looking buns. And I'm like, people probably love that.
Well, it goes along exactly with it. You're saying it's safe, but yeah, it's also like they set up, a gas station that sells what I'm sure is pretty decent barbecue in one of the most southern barbecue oriented places in the US. So like it's going to do well.
And they had their candied almonds, which is the thing Kelly wanted, and got that. We have to make a second trip out because my siblings wanted some stuff from there, and it's like, all right, I'm going back and got some stuff. Happy to do it for them, but I'm like, I'm personally never coming back here again because of all.
Did you eat the candied almonds?
I had 2 from Kelly, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're candied almonds. If you like candied almonds, great, they're good. But I don't. I mean, I can't eat a whole bag of them or anything like that.
Oh yeah, same. Where did you guys eat in St. Augustine?
There was a place called the Floridian, and they had a curry.
I've eaten there.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Had a curry dish. I actually, it didn't sit well with me. Like,
oh,
it was
really
bizarre. Yeah, I'm like, oh, this isn't. It's not sitting well. I didn't finish, and I'm like, I don't think we're coming back here because it was great last time. The last couple times.
Yeah. Whenever I go there, I will not. I've never had that there. I always eat at Harry's on the Hook, and there's another one right in the downtown strip that's a Spanish restaurant that's really good.
Was it
and
Maya's?
I always
there was one place called Maya's we were eyeing.
Yes, that place is awesome. I always get they have a mole burrito there that's really good. Yeah, but yeah, Harry's on the Hook is really good. Although since going vegetarian, I don't know how much stuff I could eat there because it's like almost all seafood.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed that a lot of places were, which makes sense because they're right there by the ocean, were seafood oriented.
There's a couple good Italian places there too.
Oh yeah, the fucking pizza place. It's like people had never had pizza. There was a line constantly there. Like it never ended. It was crazy.
Yeah, I noticed that the last time I was there too. Every pizza place, and I went there for a week, and we were eating out every meal, and I go out, and it's like so many good restaurant choices in St. Augustine, and the pizza places are just flooded. Meanwhile, I could just walk into a mom and pop's Italian place, and there's 2 people in line in front of me. I was like, this is fucking nuts.
It's beautiful though. If you're ever in town, please check out St. Augustine. If it's definitely more for adults, I would say. I didn't see a whole ton of kids there, but it's catered towards adults. There's a university nearby. There's a bunch of art shops as well. I saw original Dr. Seuss's, which blew my mind away, but I guess he has a shit ton of stuff out there. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's everywhere. But that was just kind of neat to see Dr. Seuss originals. Salvador Dali. There was Picasso originals.
Yeah,
like, that blew my mind. I was like, this be? But I'm ignorant. I don't know.
No, you're totally right. It blew my mind the first time I saw it too. But yeah, I guess because it was a port town and a commerce area for so long, just everybody's been there. So you could find anything there. That pirate museum is pretty kid friendly if you do want to bring your kids. Yeah.
And if he gets older, there's a torture museum
he's definitely got to check that out. There's some okay kid stuff in that Ripley's museum too. I don't know if you guys went to that.
No, I always saw that as like, isn't that like a tourist trap type of thing? But I guess
it's hokey, dude. But it is fun. It's got one of those anti-gravity rooms. That's pretty fun.
Cool. Here's the cow with 2 heads.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. but the like kind of science center type stuff that's in there is pretty cool. The anti-gravity room, the all the like illusion paintings, that stuff's pretty fun.
Awesome. Well, maybe when Leo gets older, for sure, it'd be something he enjoyed. But it was definitely nice to get away with Kelly and just have some time with us and not worry about, I don't want to say not being parents, but, just kind of
taking a break
together with us. Yeah, just taking a break and not worrying so much. And that's kind of the only other thing I had happen is it's still going on Twitter in case anyone missed it. But that little meme I put up of Pennywise where he's in the gutter and he's like, I've got James Gunn's 10-year plan.
That's so good.
Right. And all these construction people come in and seal it right up. It got so big to now the James Gunn fans, like they had their feelings hurt and they're going after. And I'm like, I'm trolling, of course. And I'm like going back, encouraging it more. Like, yeah. And then at the end, after like a long stream of threads, I'm like, thanks for the algorithm boost. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's been a lot of fun. If you haven't seen that meme, I did put it up everywhere. It's on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, but Twitter's the place where it's like, oh, wow, this really got you guys riled up. It's a little meme. This is fun.
I mean, people really identify with James Gunn, I guess.
I guess so.
I don't like that too much.
No. But that's a little meme can get them going, and it's definitely not playing victim here. I think it's hilarious. I love it.
Oh no, their rage only fuels your audience power. So yeah,
that's why I tell them, I'm like, you keep it coming. Like this is gas.
Yeah,
and I don't mean it in that way. Like this is literally gasoline for me. Like I'll make more memes now. But Sam, it's been awesome having you on. You had mentioned earlier that you did a show with Millennial Mike. Please let them know about the other podcast that you're working on and where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm now on Ronin Council with Millennial Mike and Scott. We're switching formats, so it's going to be a once a month thing. I'm currently almost done editing our episodes, so it should be up later this week, hopefully. I say hopefully because I have run into so many hiccups editing, but it will be up soon. So that'll be available on pretty much every podcast service. So if you're subscribed to Ronin Council already, it'll drop just like normal. Nothing's changing as far as how we distribute it. We're just adding another host, and I'm sharing some of the responsibilities with Mike. And it also adds, a little more of a dynamic with a third person to bounce stuff off of. So you guys could check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen to Daniel's podcast, listen to him back to back. We definitely name drop this show quite a few times, Daniel.
Appreciate it. And it is
absolutely
an anime podcast, in case anyone is confused. It's strictly anime.
Yeah, we do all anime for the most part, anime and like JRPG news. We do also do some industry news, just like on this show, but usually stuff that pertains to those fields. Mm-hmm. And we're going with trying not to spoil anything, but our goal is to kind of have like an episode per every anime season. So you guys can watch an episode, watch the anime we talk about, and then once you're all caught up, hopefully the next episode will be up, and we'll kind of do one for the beginning and one for the end. So you guys kind of get to watch all of the seasonal stuff along with us.
Very good. So as he mentioned, Millennial Mike and Scott and Sam all on that show, which are all hosts on this show too. So if you enjoy this show, you'll probably enjoy the Ronin Console. I don't watch a whole lot of anime, but I love listening to the Ronin Console. And also, if you do know anyone that likes anime or that is in on the anti-Warner Brothers Discovery card here, especially as this continues to grow, as more things get canceled, let them know about this podcast. Tell a friend. Word of mouth is the most effective method of podcast growth. Shares and likes and all that, they're great, but someone, when you tell them, hey, check out this podcast, they talk about Zack Snyder a lot. This week they talked about the Oscars or whatever, Netflix and Comic Talk. Let them know about the show, where they can find us at thereasonsimbroke.com, and that will definitely help us out. But I want to thank you again, Sam, for being on, and to you on the other side for tuning in once again, whether this is your first episode or your number 547th. I've been Daniel, joined by Sam, and Brocat Core, all will be well. Do you have any funny stories about any? Did you ever get caught up on anything like I did with Kangaroo Jack and Spider Man? Were you a little bit of a bootleg guy
Oh,
when you?
absolutely. So I had a guy that I was getting some bootlegs from in like middle school and high school, and they were just getting worse and worse. So I had that. Do you remember that King Arthur movie with it's like Clyde something?
The good one? Because
Uh,
there's been a few of them.
the one from 2004,
Oh, okay, 2004. Yeah, okay. So Clive Owen.
Clive Owen. Yeah, I got a copy of that, and somebody walks across the screen. Uh, the big battle scene at the end, the green screen is just actually there.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a
Yeah,
early cut.
yeah, exactly. And then, not that I missed out with this much with this one, but my friend gets a copy of X-Men Origins Wolverine, and none of the CG had been put in. So he's like, Hugh Jackman's chopping up a ladder and stuff, and it's just him swinging his arms around. It It was so bad that it was funny. I was almost like, this is a piece of film history. None of
Yeah.
the special effects have been added. You're seeing just raw footage.
Oh, I love that. I do like that a lot, actually. I love just, I'm sure at our age, we'd probably appreciate it on a whole different level of like, oh, that's kind of cool, especially since everything is green screen these days. But to see Hugh kind of swing around and not have it be a CG character Wolverine instead, like, I'm
Oh
sure
yeah.
back then, though, it would have been disappointing.
Oh, it was really funny. I'm with you though. I remember it's funny. It goes back to Spider-Man. I remember I think the first DVD my parents ever bought me was Spider-Man 1, and it was, the 2 discs. And I remember putting in that second disc of bonus features and just being fascinated with all of the behind the scenes stuff. Also, the bloopers for those are fantastic.
Yeah, and all the fucking menus, the interactive shit that takes forever to load. Like,
Yeah, dude, I miss that stuff where it's like you load up a DVD and it's an event.